The security footage from Riverside Bar and Grill would be played hundreds of times by law enforcement, analyzed by federal prosecutors, and eventually become evidence in what the media would call the 24-hour war. But watching it in real time at 10:47 p.m. on a Friday night, the 12 customers and 3 staff members present could only process that they were witnessing something that would irrevocably change their understanding of how far people would go to prove a point. 5 men wearing Red Dragon Cartel colors walked through the front entrance of the bar that Jess Brennan had owned for 6 years. Their presence immediately wrong because everyone in Riverside knew this was Angel's territory, knew Jess was married to the chapter president, knew that walking into her establishment displaying rival organization colors was either profound stupidity or deliberate provocation designed to trigger exactly the kind of response that would follow. Diego El Dragon Ruiz led the group directly to where Jess was working behind the bar, his face showing none of the confidence his body language projected, his eyes carrying something that looked disturbingly like apology as he delivered the message he'd been paid to communicate. Jessica Brennan, wife of Cole Reaper. Brennan, president of Hell's Angels Riverside chapter. You run this bar like you run your husband, thinking you have authority, thinking you deserve respect, thinking that your patch holder status makes you untouchable. You're wrong about all of that. This bar is now Red Dragon territory. You work for us. And to demonstrate that new relationship, you're going to get on your knees and apologize for existing in our space. The demand was so absurd, so deliberately designed to provoke maximum humiliation, that for 3 seconds nobody in the bar moved or spoke as they processed what was being demanded. Jess's response revealed the Marine Corps training that had defined her 20s before she'd met Cole and built a life that included but wasn't dominated by his club affiliation. Gentlemen, you have exactly 30 seconds to walk out of my bar before this situation escalates in ways your bosses didn't prepare you for. I'm not getting on my knees. I'm not apologizing. And I'm absolutely not accepting that my bar, which I built with my own money on property I own outright, has somehow become your territory. 25 seconds. Her hand moved subtly toward the modified baseball bat she kept behind the bar, the weapon a gift from Vincent Havoc Torres, who'd taught her how to use it with devastating effectiveness during the self-defense training he'd insisted all Angel's old ladies receive after his own wife had been murdered by cartel members 10 years earlier. If you're ready to witness how disrespecting one Marine Corps veteran who happened to be married to a Hells Angels president triggered a 24-hour systematic elimination of 23 cartel members across Southern California, how a seemingly simple bar confrontation exposed corruption reaching into law enforcement and federal agencies, and how the real target wasn't the cartel but the Angels themselves being manipulated into violence that would justify their destruction, hit that like button and subscribe because this story will take you into the darkest corners of institutional corruption, the mathematics of respect and retaliation, and the terrible precision of people who've been trained to kill deciding that killing is the only response that serves justice. Diego's 4 associates moved to surround Jess with coordination that suggested military training, their positioning designed to prevent escape or effective resistance. What they hadn't anticipated was that Jess had spent 8 years in the Marines, including 2 deployments to Afghanistan, had hand-to-hand combat training that exceeded anything cartel sicarios typically received, and had absolutely no intention of submitting to public humiliation in her own establishment. Her first strike with the baseball bat caught the Sicario attempting to grab her from the left, the modified weapon, weighted specifically for maximum impact, connecting with his jaw with force that shattered bone and dropped him instantly. Her second strike caught another Sicario in the knee, the carefully aimed blow destroying the joint and eliminating him as a threat before the remaining 3 could react effectively to her resistance. The fight lasted 97 seconds of brutal close-quarters violence captured from multiple angles by the bar's security cameras, Jess's training and determination allowing her to injure all 5 Sicarios before sheer numbers overwhelmed her defensive position. Diego himself didn't participate in the assault. He stood back with expression that security footage would later reveal was disgust mixed with resignation, a man following orders he didn't agree with but felt powerless to refuse. The final Sicario managed to wrestle the bat away from Jess and struck her twice across the face with it, the blows opening cuts above her eye and across her cheekbone that would require 23 stitches but weren't immediately life-threatening. They left her bleeding on the floor of her own bar, Diego's final words captured clearly by the cameras. "Tell your husband that Red Dragon Cartel doesn't tolerate disrespect. Tell him his wife fights well, but not well enough. Tell him we'll be back to collect what this bar now owes us for the medical bills of the 2 men she hospitalized. He has 24 hours. Maya Chen had been bartending at Riverside Bar for 18 months while finishing her pre-law degree at UC Riverside, her shift that night putting her behind the bar alongside Jess when the assault happened. Maya's 911 call came through at 10:52 p.m., her voice shaking but functional as she reported the attack and requested ambulance for Jess, while the 12 customers who'd witnessed everything stood frozen in shock at seeing beloved community member being beaten in her own establishment. 5 men just assaulted Jessica Brennan at her bar. She's bleeding from head wounds. 2 of the attackers are also injured. 1 has a broken jaw, 1 has a destroyed knee. The other 3 fled. Please send help immediately, and please, someone needs to tell Cole Brennan what happened before he hears it from someone else." Cole Reaper Brennan received the call from Vincent Havoc Torres at 10:58 p.m. while he was 3 hours away at a multi-chapter meeting in San Bernardino, the vice president's voice carrying controlled fury that signaled something catastrophic had occurred. "Brother, you need to get back to Riverside immediately." Red Dragon Cartel sent 5 Sicarios into Jess's bar. They demanded she get on her knees and apologize for existing. She refused. She fought. She hospitalized 2 of them before the others beat her with her own bat. She's alive, conscious, being treated at Riverside Community Hospital. The Sicarios who could walk fled. But Cole, they did this publicly. 12 customers witnessed it. They recorded it on security cameras. This wasn't covert intimidation. This was public declaration that they could violate our territory, assault your wife in her own business, and face no immediate consequences. This requires response that makes it clear what happens when you touch our families. Cole felt something cold and lethal settling into his mind as he processed Vincent's words. His 23 years in the Hells Angels providing framework for understanding that this wasn't random violence, but carefully calculated provocation designed to test whether the Angels would respond with the kind of overwhelming force that their reputation suggested. "Vin, I need you to do 3 things immediately. First, get every available brother to the hospital to secure Jess until I arrive. Second, pull all security footage from the bar and make copies that law enforcement can't seize or suppress. Third, identify every person involved in this assault, the 5 Sicarios, whoever gave them orders, whoever provided intelligence about when Jess would be vulnerable. We're going to teach Red Dragon Cartel that touching an Angel's old lady is the last mistake they ever make." The meeting Cole had been attending included presidents from 7 different chapters and had been focused on coordinating legitimate business operations and avoiding the kind of law enforcement attention that came from unnecessary violence. Those strategic considerations evaporated the moment Cole explained what had happened to Jess, every president in the room immediately recognizing that failure to respond to this provocation would signal weakness that would invite further attacks on all their families. "Brother, every chapter here commits full support," declared Marcus Chainsaw Williams, president of the San Diego chapter, and Cole's closest ally among the regional leadership. "You don't ask for help for this. We're offering it because what happened to Jess could happen to any of our old ladies if we let it stand. How many men do you need and what's the operational timeline?" Cole's response revealed tactical thinking that came from years of managing conflicts where emotional response had to be channeled through strategic planning. "I need 24 hours and complete operational freedom. In that time, I'm going to systematically eliminate every person directly involved in assaulting Jess, the 5 Sicarios who entered her bar, whoever gave them orders, whoever coordinated with them. This isn't about starting a war with Red Dragon Cartel as an organization. This is about teaching a very specific lesson. You can challenge angels over territory or business, but you never, ever touch our families. 24 hours, 23 targets based on initial intelligence, precision execution rather than indiscriminate violence. That sends the message while minimizing the federal response that a traditional massacre would trigger. Detective Frank Morrison received the call from Eduardo El Fantasma Salazar at 11:47 p.m., the cartel boss's voice carrying satisfaction that the provocation had worked exactly as planned. Frank, the assault on Jessica Brennan proceeded as we discussed. She fought back harder than anticipated and hospitalized 2 of my men, but the message was delivered. Cole Brennan will respond with violence, probably within 24 hours based on his reputation. When he does, when angels start killing Red Dragon members in what will look like unprovoked massacre, your ATF and FBI contacts will have the justification they need to launch the RICO prosecution that eliminates angels as a power in Southern California. This has worked perfectly. Morrison had been on Salazar's payroll for 8 years, collecting $15,000 monthly to provide intelligence, warn about investigations, and occasionally facilitate operations that served cartel interests while appearing to be legitimate police work. What Morrison hadn't fully appreciated until this moment was that he'd helped orchestrate an assault on a woman, an ex-Marine who owned a legitimate business, specifically to provoke her husband into violence that would be used to destroy his organization. Eduardo, Brennan isn't stupid. He'll recognize this as provocation designed to trigger exactly the kind of response you want. He might choose restraint rather than playing into your hands. Salazar's laughter was cold and dismissive. Frank, you don't understand how motorcycle clubs work. Brennan has no choice. His wife was beaten in her own bar by men displaying rival colors. Every angel in California is watching to see how he responds. If he chooses restraint, if he reports this to authorities and waits for legal process, he's perceived as weak and his leadership collapses. He must respond with overwhelming violence or lose everything. And when he does, when the bodies start appearing, you ensure your federal contacts move immediately with RICO charges that we've been building evidence for over 3 years. The angels get destroyed, Red Dragon takes their territory, and you get promoted for facilitating the takedown of a major outlaw organization. Kyle "Snake" Henderson sat in his apartment staring at the text message that had arrived 30 minutes after the assault on Jess Brennan. Kyle, the bar operation went as planned. Your information about Jessica's schedule was accurate. However, she fought back and injured 2 of our people before being subdued. This changes the operational timeline. We need updated intelligence about Cole's likely response and the location of Angel's weapons cache within 6 hours. Provide this information, or your brother Jake faces consequences for his debt. Kyle had been Angel's enforcer for 6 years, responsible for collecting debts and administering discipline, trusted by Cole completely. That trust had become a weapon 8 months ago when his younger brother Jake's heroin addiction had led to $80,000 debt to Red Dragon cartel dealers who'd offered to forgive that debt in exchange for intelligence about Angel's operations. Kyle had provided Jess's bar schedule while telling himself he was just sharing publicly available information, that surely nobody would actually assault Cole's wife, that this was just intelligence gathering rather than operational targeting. But watching news coverage of the assault, understanding that his information had enabled cartel members to time their attack perfectly, realizing that Jess had been beaten partly because of intelligence he'd provided, Kyle felt guilt and self-hatred consuming him. The follow-up demand for weapons cache locations crossed a line he couldn't rationalize away, providing that information would directly enable attacks on his brothers, would make him responsible for deaths that would follow when Red Dragon used his intelligence for operational planning. But refusing meant Jake would be tortured and killed, meant his baby brother would die screaming because Kyle had chosen loyalty to the club over family obligation. Vincent Havoc Torres stood guard outside Jess's hospital room at Riverside Community Hospital, his 50-year-old body still carrying the power and speed that had made him a successful professional boxer before joining the Angels 22 years ago. Jess's injuries weren't life-threatening, but were symbolically devastating. The stitches across her face, the swelling that distorted her features, the psychological trauma of being beaten in her own establishment while customers she knew watched helplessly. "Vincent, I hospitalized 2 of them before they got me," Jess said when she regained full consciousness, her voice carrying pride mixed with frustration. "I did everything you taught me in those self-defense sessions. I fought like you said, fast, brutal, targeting vulnerabilities. But there were 5 of them, and they had surprise advantage. If I'd had 30 more seconds, if the customers had helped instead of freezing, I could have taken them all." Vincent felt his heart breaking for this woman who reminded him so much of his murdered wife, strong, capable, refusing to accept victimization even when overwhelmed by numbers. "Jess, you did exactly right. You fought. You showed them that Angel's old ladies aren't easy targets. You hospitalized 2 trained Sicarios using a baseball bat and your Marine training. That's not failure. That's exactly the kind of response that makes future predators think twice. But Jess, you need to understand what comes next. Cole is going to respond with systematic violence that eliminates everyone involved in your assault. Not just the 5 Sicarios who came to your bar, but everyone who gave orders, everyone who coordinated, everyone who knew and enabled this. In 24 hours, 23 people are going to be dead. That's the price Red Dragon Cartel is paying for touching you. And there's nothing anyone can do to stop it, because stopping it would mean accepting that assaulting Angels' families is acceptable. It's not acceptable. It will never be acceptable." Agent Lisa Crawford had been investigating Detective Frank Morrison for 14 months based on intelligence suggesting he was providing protection for Red Dragon Cartel operations in Riverside County, her ATF position giving her authority to investigate firearms trafficking that kept crossing her desk with Morrison's fingerprints on cases that mysteriously stalled or evidence that mysteriously disappeared. When the alert came through about the assault on Jessica Brennan, Crawford's corruption investigation instincts immediately recognized that this might be the provocation she'd been warning her supervisors about. Morrison using his cartel connections to trigger Angel's violence that would justify the federal response Morrison had been advocating for in coordination with compromised agents in multiple agencies. She pulled Morrison's phone records for the past 72 hours and found exactly what she'd suspected. Multiple calls to numbers associated with Eduardo Salazar's network, 3 meetings at locations that surveillance teams had identified as cartel police coordination sites, and most damningly, text messages discussing the Brennan operation and ensuring appropriate federal response when violence escalates. Crawford had been trying to build a case against Morrison through traditional investigative methods, but this assault on Jessica Brennan provided the catalyst she'd been waiting for. Undeniable evidence that Morrison had coordinated an attack on a civilian to serve cartel interests while using his badge as cover. "Morrison isn't just corrupt," Crawford told her supervisor during emergency briefing at 1 a.m. "He's actively facilitating cartel operations, including assault on civilians. And he's coordinating with someone inside our agency or FBI to ensure that when Angels retaliate, the federal response serves cartel interests by eliminating the Angels while Red Dragon takes their territory unopposed." Cole Reaper Brennan arrived at Riverside Community Hospital at 2:34 a.m. to find his wife sitting up in her bed with 23 fresh stitches across her face, her eyes showing not fear or victimization but cold fury that matched his own. "Cole, before you say anything, before you start planning whatever you're going to do, I need you to understand something," Jess said, her Marine Corps directness cutting through any emotional preamble. "I fought. I hurt them badly. I hospitalized 2 of those 5 Sicarios before they overwhelmed me. This wasn't me being helpless. This was me being outnumbered by trained fighters who came specifically to provoke exactly the response you're planning. Someone coordinated this. Someone knew my schedule, knew when I'd be alone behind the bar, knew that assaulting me publicly would force you to respond in ways that serve their larger agenda. Don't give them what they want. Don't walk into whatever trap they've set. Cole held his wife's hand, his tactical mind processing her warning even as every instinct screamed for immediate violent retaliation. Jess, you're right that this was coordinated provocation. Vincent and I have already identified that pattern. But you're wrong about me having a choice. Every angel in Southern California is watching to see how I respond to my wife being beaten in her own bar. If I choose restraint, if I wait for legal process, I'm perceived as weak and my leadership collapses. The club fractures, other cartels see us as acceptable targets, everything we've built gets destroyed through perception of vulnerability. I have to respond with overwhelming force or lose everything. He paused, his voice softening slightly. But I'm not walking into their trap blindly. We're going to respond with precision rather than chaos. 24 hours, 23 targets. Systematic elimination rather than indiscriminate massacre. That sends the message while minimizing the federal exposure that traditional violence would create. The War Council that convened in the Riverside Clubhouse at 4 a.m. included chapter presidents from 7 organizations representing over 800 bikers, their presence testament to how seriously the assault on Jess was being treated across the entire Southern California motorcycle community. Vincent Havoc Torres laid out the tactical plan that he and Cole had developed during the 3-hour drive back from San Bernardino. We've identified 23 people directly involved in or responsible for the assault on Jessica Brennan. 5 Sicarios who entered the bar. 3 cartel lieutenants who gave orders. 6 support personnel who provided intelligence and logistics. 4 law enforcement officials who coordinated the operation. And 5 civilians who provided targeting information including bar schedule and security details. Our operation eliminates all 23 within 24 hours using precision strikes rather than prolonged engagement that would give targets time to flee or law enforcement time to intervene. Marcus Chainsaw Williams raised the obvious concern that everyone was thinking, Vincent, you're talking about killing 4 law enforcement officials. That crosses a line that brings federal heat we've carefully avoided for decades. How do we justify that to members who joined this club for brotherhood rather than war with cops? Vincent's response revealed the evidence that Agent Lisa Crawford had been quietly sharing through back channels she'd established. The 4 law enforcement targets aren't clean cops who happen to be in wrong place. They're corrupt officials who've been on Red Dragon payroll for years. Detective Frank Morrison coordinated Jess's assault directly. His 3 associates provided intelligence, blocked investigations, and facilitated cartel operations that have killed civilians. We have phone records, financial transactions, and surveillance footage documenting their corruption. When we eliminate them, when federal investigators examine their activities, they'll find evidence that justifies our actions as removing corrupt officials who were using badges to facilitate organized crime. The tactical execution plan was divided into 8 coordinated strikes happening simultaneously across Riverside, San Bernardino, and Orange counties, each strike team consisting of 5 to 8 angels with specific targets and extraction routes. We're not doing drive-by shootings or public executions, Vincent emphasized, his boxing career having taught him about precision and timing that translated directly to tactical operations. Every elimination happens in isolated locations where civilian casualties are impossible. Every target is confirmed through multiple intelligence sources. Every team has abort protocols if situations develop that increase risk to innocents. This isn't massacre. It's surgical removal of people who participated in assaulting Jess. The message isn't that we're uncontrollable animals, it's that we're disciplined operators who can execute precision campaigns when our families are violated. Kyle Snake Henderson entered the War Council at 5:47 a.m. with confession that would either get him killed immediately or provide the intelligence breakthrough that would make the entire operation more effective. Cole, I need to tell you something that's going to make you want to execute me right here. 8 months ago, Red Dragon Cartel approached me about my brother Jake's heroin debt. They offered to forgive $80,000 in exchange for intelligence about club operations. I provided Jess's bar schedule. I enabled them to time the assault perfectly. I betrayed your wife and the club because I couldn't watch my baby brother being tortured for drug debts. I'm guilty of everything you're thinking. But before you kill me, I can give you something. The location where they're holding Jake, the names of the 4 corrupt cops including Morrison, and the operational plan they're using to trigger federal response that eliminates Angels while Red Dragon takes our territory. The silence that followed Kyle's confession lasted 17 seconds, long enough for every person in the room to process betrayal from within, short enough that Cole's tactical mind recognized the intelligence value before his emotional response to betrayal could override strategic thinking. Kyle, you enabled an assault on my wife that put her in the hospital. You betrayed the club, betrayed me personally, betrayed every brother who trusted you. The fact that you were coerced through Jake's addiction doesn't erase what you did. It just explains it. Cole's hand moved to his weapon, the movement drawing similar responses from a dozen other Angels who understood that betrayal traditionally earned immediate execution. But you're offering intelligence that changes our operational planning from reactive violence to proactive exposure of the entire corruption network. So here's what happens. You provide everything you know. You wear a wire and document Morrison's coordination with the cartel. You help us rescue Jake. And then Kyle, you're out bad forever. You leave California, you never contact any brother again, and you live with the guilt of knowing you betrayed us even if we're allowing you to survive that betrayal. Diego El Dragon Ruiz sat in his apartment at 6 a.m., knowing that he had maybe 12 hours before Angel's retaliation found him, his wife Carmen beside him, understanding that the man she'd married 10 years ago was about to die for following orders he'd disagreed with but felt powerless to refuse. Diego, why did you do it? Carmen asked, her voice carrying more confusion than anger. Why did you assault that woman? You told me last month you were getting out of the cartel, that you'd saved enough money that we could disappear to Mexico and start legitimate business. Why throw that away by attacking a Hells Angels president's wife? Diego's response revealed the complex coercion that had led him to participate in operation he'd opposed. Eduardo Salazar told me that if I refused the Brennan operation, he'd have our daughter Maria kidnapped and held until I completed 10 more assignments. He showed me photographs of Maria leaving school. He described exactly how he'd hurt her if I didn't obey. I chose my daughter's safety over that Marine woman's dignity. I made the wrong choice. Now Jessica Brennan is in the hospital, Cole Brennan is planning retaliation that will kill me, and Maria grows up knowing her father died as a coward who assaulted women because he was too weak to refuse. Carmen processed this with the clinical assessment of an ER nurse who'd treated hundreds of cartel violence victims over 15 years. Diego, you're going to die within 24 hours. Cole Brennan won't accept explanations or excuses. But maybe you can die protecting something rather than just waiting for execution. You have information about Eduardo's coordination with corrupt police. You know about the larger plan to trigger Angels violence that justifies federal prosecution. You can provide that to authorities before Angels find you. Your death can mean something beyond just retaliation. It can expose the corruption that made your choice feel impossible. That's not redemption. You don't get redemption for assaulting an innocent woman, but it's better than dying for nothing. Agent Lisa Crawford received the encrypted message from Carmen Ruiz at 7:23 a.m. Agent Crawford, my name is Carmen Ruiz. My husband Diego participated in the assault on Jessica Brennan. He's going to be killed by Angels within hours. Before he dies, he wants to provide complete testimony about Detective Morrison's coordination with Eduardo Salazar's cartel, about the corrupt federal agents who are planning to use Angels' retaliation as justification for RICO prosecution that serves cartel interests. Diego is guilty of assault. He deserves prosecution. But he also has information that can expose corruption reaching into ATF and FBI. Can you offer him protective custody in exchange for complete cooperation? He has maybe 8 hours before angels locate him. Carmen Ruiz, RN, Riverside Community Hospital. Crawford immediately coordinated with her supervisor to arrange emergency protective custody for Diego, understanding that his testimony could provide the evidence she'd been building against Morrison and the corrupt federal agents she'd been tracking for 18 months. "We need Diego Ruiz alive and talking," Crawford argued during emergency conference call with ATF leadership. "He can provide direct evidence of Morrison coordinating with cartel leadership to provoke Angel's violence. He can identify the corrupt agents in our organization and FBI who are planning to use that violence to justify prosecutions that serve cartel rather than justice interests. And he can do it in time to prevent the 24-hour war that Cole Brennan is planning if we move fast enough to arrest Morrison and Salazar before Angels execute their retaliation plan." The extraction of Diego Ruiz happened at 9:47 a.m. with ATF tactical teams breaching his apartment expecting resistance, but finding him and Carmen waiting with packed bags and comprehensive documentation, recordings of conversations with Eduardo Salazar, text messages from Detective Morrison coordinating the assault on Jess, financial records showing payments to Morrison and 3 other corrupt officials, and most damningly, operational plans discussing how Angel's expected retaliation would be used to justify federal prosecution coordinated with agents who were compromised by cartel money. "Agent Crawford, everything you need is in these files," Diego said as he was secured in federal custody. Morrison coordinated the assault on Jessica Brennan. Eduardo Salazar ordered it as provocation to trigger Cole Brennan's response. 2 agents in your ATF office and 3 in FBI are being paid to ensure that when Angels retaliate, the federal response eliminates them while allowing Red Dragon to take their territory unopposed. "I participated in this because Salazar threatened my daughter. I'm guilty. I deserve prison. But maybe my cooperation prevents more bloodshed and exposes the corruption that made this situation possible." Detective Frank Morrison received the emergency call from Eduardo Salazar at 10:34 a.m., the cartel boss's voice carrying panic that Morrison had never heard before. "Frank, Diego Ruiz just entered federal protective custody. He's providing testimony to ATF about our coordination. They're going to have recordings, financial records, operational plans, everything. We need to eliminate him before he can testify in detail. And we need to accelerate the Angels operation. Cole Brennan's retaliation is coming within hours. We need to ensure our federal contacts move immediately with arrests rather than waiting for body count to accumulate." The timeline has collapsed. Morrison felt his carefully managed corruption unraveling as he understood that Diego's cooperation would expose 8 years of protection he'd provided to Red Dragon operations. "Eduardo, if Diego is in federal custody, he's beyond our reach. A TF will have him in secure facility with protection we can't penetrate. Our only option is eliminating other witnesses who can corroborate his testimony, starting with the bartender Maya Chen, who witnessed the assault on Jessica Brennan and probably recorded details that support Diego's version. She's vulnerable, she's predictable, and her death can be staged as Angel's retaliation gone wrong, collateral damage that justifies immediate federal intervention against the club." The calculation was cold, and Morrison knew it crossed lines he'd told himself he'd never cross. Murdering civilian witnesses to cover up corruption rather than just looking the other way on cartel operations. But his pension, his freedom, his family's future, all of it depended on preventing Diego's testimony from being corroborated by other witnesses who could document the conspiracy. Maya Chen received the warning call from Agent Crawford at 11:47 a.m. while she was in her UC Riverside apartment preparing for her afternoon pre-law class. "Maya, this is Agent Lisa Crawford with ATF. You witnessed the assault on Jessica Brennan 2 nights ago. The people who coordinated that assault are now eliminating witnesses who can provide testimony about it. Detective Frank Morrison is corrupt and working for Red Dragon Cartel. He's identified you as a threat. You need to enter protective custody immediately." We have agents en route to your location. Do not leave your apartment. Do not open the door for anyone except federal agents who will identify themselves with credentials and a code phrase I'm texting you now. Maya, the next 6 hours are critical. Morrison is desperate, and desperate corrupt cops are extremely dangerous. Maya's response revealed both her pre-law student analytical thinking and her genuine terror. Agent Crawford, I recorded everything on my phone that night. I have video of the entire assault from my position behind the bar. I have audio of Diego Ruiz delivering the message about Red Dragon taking over the bar. I have documentation of Jessica fighting back and hospitalizing 2 Sicarios before being overwhelmed. I've been planning to provide all of this to authorities but was waiting until after finals week. If Detective Morrison wants me dead, it's because my recordings prove Jessica was assaulted in coordinated operation rather than random bar fight. I'm sending you the files right now. If something happens to me, at least the evidence survives. The attempt on Maya Chen's life happened at 1:34 p.m. when Morrison himself arrived at her apartment complex wearing his police uniform and using his badge to gain access from the building manager, his plan being to stage Maya's death as home invasion gone wrong or Angel's retaliation against witness. What Morrison hadn't anticipated was that ATF tactical teams had arrived 17 minutes earlier and had positioned themselves throughout the building specifically to protect Maya from the threat Crawford had identified. When Morrison entered Maya's apartment using the key he'd obtained through his police authority, he found not a vulnerable pre-law student, but 6 federal agents with weapons drawn and cameras recording everything. Detective Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, corruption, obstruction of justice, and about 40 other charges we'll add as we review your 8 years of protecting Red Dragon cartel operations, Crawford announced, her voice carrying satisfaction at finally catching the corrupt cop she'd been tracking for over a year. Morrison's arrest was broadcast live on local news, the footage of Riverside PD detective being led out in handcuffs becoming instant symbol of corruption that had enabled cartel operations while hiding behind badge authority. His phone records and financial documents seized during arrest provided comprehensive evidence of his 8-year relationship with Eduardo Salazar, including specific coordination of Jessica Brennan's assault and plans to use Angel's retaliation as justification for federal prosecution that would eliminate the club while allowing Red Dragon to expand unopposed. Detective Morrison facilitated an assault on a civilian to serve cartel interests while using his position to protect organized crime operations, the ATF spokesperson announced during press conference. His arrest is part of broader investigation into corruption that reaches into multiple law enforcement agencies. More arrests are coming. Cole Reaper Brennan received the call from Agent Crawford at 2:47 p.m., 14 hours into his planned 24-hour retaliation campaign, with offer that required him to make impossible choice between club justice and legal process. Mr. Brennan, this is Agent Lisa Crawford with ATF. I understand you're planning systematic retaliation against everyone involved in your wife's assault. I'm calling to tell you that retaliation is unnecessary and counterproductive. We have Diego Ruiz in custody providing comprehensive testimony. We've arrested Detective Morrison. We're executing warrants on Eduardo Salazar and Red Dragon's leadership. We have recordings, financial records, and witness testimony that will result in federal prosecution of everyone involved in assaulting Jessica. If you proceed with your retaliation plan, you'll be killing people who are already facing justice, and you'll be giving corrupt federal agents the ammunition they need to prosecute Angels using RICO statutes that Diego's testimony reveals were being prepared specifically to serve cartel interests. Stand down. Let legal process work. Your wife gets justice without Angels facing federal destruction. Cole's response came after 30 seconds of silence. Agent Crawford, you're asking me to trust that legal process will deliver real justice when that same legal process employed a detective who coordinated my wife's assault. You're asking me to believe that federal prosecution will be genuine when Diego's testimony reveals corrupt agents in your organization planning to use our retaliation as excuse to eliminate us. And you're asking me to demonstrate restraint when every angel in California is watching to see whether I'm strong enough to lead or weak enough that assaulting our families carries no immediate consequences. I appreciate your arrests. I appreciate Diego's cooperation. But justice through courts takes years and can be corrupted through influence we can't counter. Justice through systematic elimination of threats takes 24 hours and sends message that lasts generations. I'm not standing down. Vincent Havoc Torres led the first strike team at 4:47 p.m., targeting Eduardo El Fantasma Salazar's fortified compound in San Bernardino, where the cartel boss had retreated after learning about Morrison's arrest and Diego's cooperation. The compound was defended by 16 sicarios with military-grade weapons, the defenses designed to repel law enforcement raids rather than motorcycle club assaults. What Salazar hadn't anticipated was that Vincent had spent 2 years in Marine Force Recon before his boxing career, that he'd trained angels in tactics that combined military precision with outlaw aggression, and that attacking a fortified position wasn't about overwhelming force, but about creating chaos that defenders couldn't effectively respond to through their prepared defenses. "We're not breaching the main compound," Vincent told his 8-man team during final briefing. "We're creating 3 simultaneous fires at different positions that force evacuation through channels we control. When they run from the fires, we eliminate targets in the confusion. Salazar is primary objective. His death ends Red Dragon's leadership and sends message that ordering assaults on our families is fatal regardless of how well you're protected." The assault on Eduardo Salazar's compound began at 5:34 p.m. with coordinated incendiary attacks at 3 points along the perimeter. The fires creating chaos and confusion that forced the 16 defending sicarios to abandon their prepared defensive positions and evacuate through routes that Vincent's team had identified and positioned themselves to control. The operation wasn't a frontal assault, but a calculated forcing of movement into kill zones, the tactics reflecting Vincent's Marine training and his understanding that fortified positions become death traps when defenders are forced to abandon them under time pressure. The first wave of sicarios evacuating through the eastern exit encountered Cole's 5-man team positioned with interlocking fields of fire, the engagement lasting 47 seconds and resulting in 6 cartel members down before the remaining defenders recognized the trap and attempted alternative escape routes. Eduardo El Fantasma Salazar evacuated through his personal escape tunnel, a reinforced passageway leading 300 yards from the compound to a garage containing vehicles prepared for emergency flight. What Salazar hadn't known was that Kyle "Snake" Henderson, wearing federal wire and working under Agent Crawford's supervision, had provided exact specifications of this tunnel to both ATF teams and to Vincent's strike force. Salazar emerged from the tunnel at 5:53 p.m. to find Vincent Torres waiting with the calm patience of someone who'd spent 20 years perfecting timing and precision. "Eduardo Salazar, you ordered the assault on Jessica Brennan to provoke Angel's violence that would justify our elimination while Red Dragon took our territory. You paid Detective Morrison to coordinate it. You threatened Diego Ruiz's daughter to force his participation. You built your entire operation on the premise that we're animals who can be manipulated into destroying ourselves through predictable violence." Vincent's weapon remained holstered as he continued speaking, his voice carrying the controlled menace of someone who decided that Eduardo deserved to understand exactly why he was about to die. "You were right that we value respect and retaliation. You were wrong that those values make us predictable. We respond with precision rather than chaos. We eliminate threats systematically rather than indiscriminately. And we ensure that people like you understand before you die that attacking our families doesn't trigger the federal response you wanted, it just triggers the ending of your operation and your life. Jessica Brennan is an ex-Marine who fought back against your Sicarios and hospitalized 2 of them. She's the kind of woman who deserves protection rather than being used as bait in your schemes. You're the kind of predator who deserves exactly what's coming." Vincent's first shot hit Salazar center mass, the follow-up shot to the head ensuring immediate death rather than prolonged suffering. "That's for Jess," Vincent said quietly. "And this next one is for my wife Maria, who your organization murdered 10 years ago." The third shot was unnecessary from tactical standpoint, but essential from emotional closure perspective. Vincent's decade of grief channeled into ensuring Eduardo Salazar died, knowing his schemes had failed completely. The firefight at the compound continued for another 17 minutes as Angels systematically eliminated the remaining Sicarios, while ATF teams positioned around the perimeter documented everything through surveillance that would later be used in federal prosecution of surviving Red Dragon members. By 6:11 p.m., 16 cartel members were dead, Eduardo Salazar was dead, and Vincent Torres had taken 2 rounds, one through his left shoulder, one through his abdomen, during the final exchange with Sicarios attempting to break through the perimeter. "Vin, stay with me," Cole said, applying pressure to Vincent's abdominal wound while calling for medical evacuation. "You did it. You got Salazar. You ended Red Dragon's leadership. Just hold on until the ambulance arrives. You're not dying today, brother, not after everything we've accomplished." Vincent's response came through labored breathing, his combat experience telling him what Cole didn't want to acknowledge. The abdominal wound had hit something vital. The blood loss was too rapid. The medical help was too far away. "Cole, I'm done. I can feel it. But listen to me. Jess is safe. You protected her. You sent the message that needs to be sent, and I got to kill the man whose organization murdered Maria. That's enough. That's better than most people get, dying for something that matters, protecting people who deserve protection, settling debts that have haunted me for 10 years. Tell Jess she fought like a Marine and made me proud. Tell the club that precision is always better than chaos. And Cole, tell my daughter Sophia that I died thinking about her mother and hoping I'd finally done something that made up for not being there when Maria needed me." Vincent Havoc Torres died at 6:24 p.m. before the ambulance could arrive, his death marking the only Angels casualty in the 24-hour campaign that systematically eliminated 23 Red Dragon cartel members, including their leadership, their top lieutenants, and the corrupt law enforcement officials who'd facilitated their operations. Cole held his vice president and closest friend as he died, his grief temporarily suppressed behind tactical necessity of extracting his team before law enforcement locked down the area. "Brothers, we move now. Vincent bought us this victory with his life. We're not wasting it by getting caught in the aftermath. Extract to rally points. Destroy all communications devices. Scatter and reconvene in 72 hours. Vincent's death means something. Make sure your survival honors that meaning." The media coverage that dominated the next 72 hours framed the events in competing narratives that reflected political agendas and institutional interests. Local news emphasized Angels' violence and called for federal crackdown on motorcycle clubs. National media focused on corruption exposed through Diego Ruiz's testimony and Detective Morrison's arrest. Federal prosecutors highlighted successful takedown of Red Dragon cartel leadership and their law enforcement protectors. And community organizations pointed to Jessica Brennan's assault as catalyst that exposed systemic corruption that had been operating with impunity for years. The truth contained elements of all these narratives while being reducible to none of them. This was a story about a woman being assaulted to provoke her husband, about corrupt officials facilitating that assault to serve larger agenda, about systematic retaliation that eliminated threats with precision rather than chaos, and about communities organizing to protect themselves when institutions designed to serve them had been completely compromised. Agent Lisa Crawford's investigation expanded dramatically following the 24-hour war, her documentation of Morrison's corruption leading to arrests of 2 ATF agents and 3 FBI agents who'd been coordinating with Red Dragon Cartel to use Angels' expected retaliation as justification for RICO prosecution that would have eliminated the club while allowing cartel expansion. These weren't rogue agents pursuing legitimate investigation, Crawford explained during press conference that detailed the extent of corruption her team had uncovered. These were federal law enforcement officials who were being paid by organized crime to destroy the Angels using legal process as a weapon. They facilitated Jessica Brennan's assault, knowing it would trigger retaliation, then planned to use that retaliation to justify prosecution that served cartel interests rather than justice. The fact that Cole Brennan's response was systematic elimination of specific threats rather than indiscriminate violence actually complicated their plans. It's harder to justify RICO prosecution when the targets are defending their families through precision operations that specifically avoid civilian casualties. The federal grand jury that reviewed evidence from Diego Ruiz's testimony, Morrison's seized records, and Crawford's investigation ultimately declined to bring charges against Cole Brennan or any angels involved in the 24-hour campaign, their decision reflecting controversial interpretation of self-defense doctrine and defense of others' justification. While we don't condone vigilante justice, the grand jury forewoman explained in rare public statement, the evidence shows that Jessica Brennan was assaulted in coordinated operation designed to provoke exactly the response that occurred. The Angels' retaliation was systematic rather than chaotic, targeted specific individuals who participated in or facilitated that assault, and was executed with care to avoid civilian casualties. Given the corruption that had compromised law enforcement's ability to provide justice through legal process, given the immediate threat to other Angels' family members that Red Dragon's provocation represented, and given the precision with which the Angels executed their response, we find insufficient basis for federal prosecution. Diego El Dragon Ruiz pled guilty to assault, conspiracy, and racketeering charges, his cooperation with federal prosecutors earning him reduced sentence of 15 years with eligibility for parole after serving 10. His testimony resulted in convictions of 8 corrupt law enforcement officials, dismantling of Red Dragon Cartel's Southern California operations, and comprehensive documentation of how organized crime had infiltrated and corrupted institutions designed to protect communities. I assaulted Jessica Brennan because Eduardo Salazar threatened my daughter, Diego said during his sentencing hearing. I followed orders I knew were wrong because I convinced myself that protecting my child justified any compromise. I was wrong. Mrs. Brennan is an honorable woman who fought back against 5 armed men and hospitalized 2 of us before being overwhelmed. She deserved protection, not assault. I can't undo what I did. But my testimony has exposed the corruption that made my choice feel impossible, and maybe that prevents future fathers from making my mistakes. Carmen Ruiz continued her work as ER nurse at Riverside Community Hospital. Her testimony about Diego's coercion and her role in facilitating his cooperation with Agent Crawford earning her respect from both law enforcement and Angels community who recognized that she'd chosen justice over protecting her husband from consequences. She maintained occasional contact with Jessica Brennan through community events, the 2 women's relationship defined by complex recognition that they'd both been victims of the same corruption network, Jess through being targeted for assault, Carmen through having her husband coerced into participating in that assault through threats to their daughter. Mrs. Brennan showed me what courage looks like, Carmen said during interview about domestic violence and community support systems. She fought back against 5 men. She hospitalized 2 of them. She survived being beaten with her own weapon, and she chose to focus on exposing the corruption rather than just seeking revenge against individuals who were themselves being coerced. That's strength that goes beyond physical combat. It's moral clarity about who deserves punishment and who deserves understanding. Kyle Snake Henderson left California 3 days after Vincent's funeral. His exile from the Angels meaning he could never return to the state or contact any brother again. His cooperation with Agent Crawford, providing Diego's location, wearing wire to document Morrison's corruption, revealing the tunnel specifications that allowed Vincent's team to intercept Salazar, had contributed to the successful exposure of the entire conspiracy. But his initial betrayal in providing Jess's schedule had enabled the assault that started everything, and that betrayal earned permanent exile rather than execution only because Cole recognized that Kyle's subsequent cooperation had been a genuine attempt to fix what he'd broken. "Kyle, you enabled an assault on my wife," Cole had told him during their final meeting. Your brother Jake's addiction was used as leverage, and I understand that desperation. But you still made the choice to betray us. You're alive because your cooperation helped expose Morrison and Salazar. You're exiled because your betrayal can never be forgiven even if it's being allowed to be survived. Leave California. Never contact any angel again. And every day for the rest of your life, remember that Jess was beaten partly because you were too weak to ask your brothers for help when Jake got into trouble. Jake Henderson died from heroin overdose 4 days after being rescued from Red Dragon custody, his body too damaged by 8 months of addiction and abuse to survive the withdrawal and medical complications that followed. Kyle buried his brother in Oregon under a name that wasn't theirs. The funeral attended only by Kyle and a priest who'd never met Jake, but understood that addiction destroyed families in ways that sometimes couldn't be repaired, even when intervention came. Jake died because I tried to save him through betrayal instead of asking my club for help, Kyle wrote in letter to Robert that he sent but never expected response to. I traded my brother's trust for my brother's life, and I lost both. That's my punishment. Living with knowing that if I'd been honest from the beginning, if I'd trusted the angels to help Jake when the debt first became impossible, maybe we could have found a solution that didn't require betraying anyone. I'm sorry isn't enough. It will never be enough. But it's all I have left to offer. Jess Brennan returned to work at Riverside Bar and Grill 3 weeks after the assault, her stitches removed but scars remaining as permanent reminder of the night 5 cartel members had tried to humiliate her into submission and instead had learned that ex-Marines don't surrender easily. The bar had been renovated during her recovery, new security systems, reinforced doors, and most significantly, a memorial wall honoring Vincent Havoc Torres, who'd taught Jess the self-defense techniques that had allowed her to hospitalize 2 of her attackers before being overwhelmed. Vincent saved my life twice, Jess explained during the bar's reopening ceremony that drew 300 people including bikers from 8 different clubs. First, by teaching me to fight back effectively. Second, by leading the operation that eliminated Eduardo Salazar and ended Red Dragon's ability to threaten our community. He died doing what he'd dedicated his life to after his wife's murder, protecting Angel's families from cartel violence. This bar exists because Vincent existed. These scars on my face exist because I fought back the way Vincent taught me. And Red Dragon Cartel doesn't exist in Southern California anymore because Vincent's final operation was executed with precision that eliminated threats rather than creating chaos. The Angels held Vincent's funeral 4 weeks after his death, the ceremony drawing 20,000 people, including Marines from his Force Recon unit, boxers from his professional fighting career, and family members from 8 different motorcycle clubs who recognized that Vincent's death had served protection of all their families rather than just Angel's interests. Cole delivered the eulogy with voice breaking in ways his brothers had rarely witnessed. Vincent Torres was my vice president for 12 years, my tactical advisor, my closest friend. He was Force Recon Marine who brought military discipline to club operations. He was professional boxer who taught us that precision beats power, that timing beats strength, that thinking beats reacting. He was husband who lost his wife Maria to cartel violence 10 years ago and spent the decade since ensuring no other Angel's family suffered the same loss. And he died killing Eduardo Salazar, the man whose organization had murdered Maria, had ordered Jess's assault, had corrupted law enforcement officials to serve cartel interests while hiding behind institutional authority. Cole paused, looking across the massive gathering. Vincent's death isn't tragedy, it's triumph. He achieved every objective he'd set for himself, protecting Jess from the people who assaulted her, eliminating Red Dragon's leadership, exposing the corruption that had enabled their operations, and settling the debt for Maria's murder that had haunted him for 10 years. He died doing what he'd trained for, what he'd lived for, what he'd dedicated his life to after Maria's death. Most people don't get that. They die from disease or accident or old age without ever achieving their purpose. Vincent died with his purpose fulfilled, His brothers protected, his wife avenged, and his legacy secured. That's not failure. That's exactly the ending a warrior earns when he lives with honor and dies protecting what matters. 3 years after the assault and the 24-hour war that followed, Riverside Bar and Grill had become a community gathering place that transcended its origins as Angel's Hangout. The establishment serving everyone from bikers to college students to elderly residents who'd been drawn by Jess's reputation as someone who'd fought back against overwhelming odds and survived. The memorial wall honoring Vincent had expanded to include photographs and stories from dozens of people he'd helped over his 22 years in the Angels, the display serving as reminder that outlaw organizations could produce people of genuine honor and courage rather than just criminals hiding behind brotherhood rhetoric. Jess maintained her Marine Corps fitness routine and continued the self-defense classes that Vincent had started before his death, her teaching ensuring that future generations of Angel's old ladies would know how to fight back if threatened. Maya Chen graduated from UC Riverside School of Law and immediately joined the Riverside County District Attorney's Office with specific focus on prosecuting corruption cases and protecting witnesses who came forward against organized crime. Her first major case involved prosecuting the surviving Red Dragon members who'd participated in supporting the assault on Jess, her prosecution securing convictions that sent 12 cartel members to federal prison for conspiracy, assault, and racketeering. Mrs. Brennan's case taught me that sometimes victims fight back, sometimes communities organize to protect themselves when institutions fail, and sometimes justice requires unconventional alliances between law enforcement and organizations that law enforcement traditionally prosecutes, Maya explained during interview about her career trajectory. I became a prosecutor because I witnessed Jessica Brennan refuse to surrender, because I saw Cole Brennan execute systematic campaign that eliminated specific threats rather than creating chaos, and because I understood that legal process has to serve justice rather than just institutional interests. Vincent Torres died protecting our community. Agent Crawford exposed corruption within federal agencies. Diego Ruiz chose testimony over protecting himself. All of them contributed to justice that courts alone couldn't have achieved. Agent Lisa Crawford was promoted to lead ATF's Internal Affairs Division for the Western region, her role in exposing the corrupt agents who'd been coordinating with Red Dragon Cartel, establishing her reputation as someone who'd investigate fellow law enforcement when evidence demanded it. She maintained contact with Cole Brennan through unofficial channels, their relationship defined by mutual respect between people who'd chosen different paths to similar destination, protecting communities from corruption that hid behind authority. The Angels' 24-hour war forced federal agencies to acknowledge corruption we'd been trying to ignore because prosecuting our own people is politically difficult, Crawford acknowledged during testimony before Congressional Committee investigating law enforcement corruption. Cole Brennan's systematic elimination of threats exposed the entire network, the cartel leadership, the corrupt cops, the compromised federal agents. His methods were illegal. His results were justice that legal process had failed to deliver through 8 years of Red Dragon operating with impunity. That's uncomfortable truth for law enforcement, but it's truth nonetheless. Their story serves as reminder that respect and family protection transcend all other considerations in outlaw culture, that systematic precision can be more effective than chaotic violence, and that sometimes justice requires communities organizing themselves rather than waiting for institutions that have been compromised by the very criminals they're supposed to fight. Eduardo Salazar thought he could manipulate Angels into self-destructive violence by provoking them through assaulting Cole's wife. Detective Morrison thought he could facilitate that assault while hiding behind his badge. Both learned that underestimating people who value precision over chaos, who prioritize family protection over all other concerns, and who can execute 24-hour campaigns that eliminate 23 specific targets without civilian casualties. That's fatal miscalculation that no amount of institutional protection can prevent. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more content exploring respect, retaliation, and the complex reality of justice when legal institutions have been corrupted. Share this with someone who needs to understand that touching people's families triggers responses that transcend normal risk calculations, that ex-Marines don't submit easily regardless of circumstances, and that systematic precision in protecting loved ones sends clearer message than indiscriminate violence ever could. Jessica Brennan was assaulted to provoke her husband into violence that would justify federal destruction of his organization. She fought back and hospitalized 2 attackers. Cole Brennan responded with 24-hour systematic elimination of 23 specific threats. Vincent Torres died killing the man who'd ordered it all. And the combination, assault and resistance, provocation and precision, corruption and exposure, defines the world where respect isn't just demanded but enforced through whatever means achieve protection of families when institutions designed to provide that protection have been completely compromised.